The image of the eccentric billionaire haunts American culture. Titans who plaster their names across skylines, competing to build the most luxurious towers and go the farthest into space. Indeed, their wealth screams for attention. And yet, buried in Manhattan's tumultuous real estate history, lies a fortune that deliberately erased itself from public view. See, the Wendel family controlled an empire rivaling the Rockefellers themselves, but refused to announce their existence to the world around them. And while Vanderbilts hosted lavish galas and Carnegies built libraries, this shadowy clan engineered a financial kingdom based on refusal. Refusing modernization, refusing visibility, refusing the very century they inhabited. Soon, the fortune that should have liberated them instead imprisoned them, warping their minds until wealth and madness became indistinguishable. Thus, in today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we unravel America's most psychologically disturbing dynasty, the billionaires who chose invisibility and paid for it with their sanity as we describe the Gilded Age family that went insane, the downfall of the Wendel dynasty. In the shadow of Manhattan's gleaming Art Deco spires stood an architectural anachronism that defied the relentless march of progress. The four-story brownstone at 442 Fifth Avenue remained frozen in the 1850s, while skyscrapers grew around it like crystalline forests. Gas lamps flickered in windows framed by iron bars, their amber glow a stubborn rebellion against Edison's electric grid that powered the surrounding metropolis. This was no ordinary mansion, but the fortress headquarters of New York's most confusing dynasty, the Wendels, whose wealth rivaled the Rockefellers, yet whose lifestyle belonged to another century altogether. The Wendel saga began with Johann Georg Wendel's immigration to New York around 1710, part of the Palatine migration that would seed America's economic aristocracy. By 1801, his descendant John G. Wendel I had established a thriving operation that capitalized on New York's strategic position as the nexus of the North American fur trade. The family's enterprise functioned within the triangular economics of colonial commerce. European manufacturers supplied trade goods to colonial merchants, who exchanged them with indigenous trappers for furs, which then shipped to European markets at profit margins exceeding 300%. When declining fur stocks in the Northeast and the rising popularity of silk hats eroded the trade's profitability in the 1830s, the Wendels executed a pivot that would ultimately create a fortune worth over $2 billion in today's currency. John G. Wendel I began acquiring Manhattan properties in the 1820s, focusing on undeveloped lots north of settled areas, with the prescient understanding that the island's constraints would inevitably push development northward. His investment strategy paralleled the frontier speculation model of the fur trade, identifying undervalued assets in territories positioned for explosive growth. Between 1790 and 1850, New York's population erupted from 33,000 to 696,000 souls, creating unprecedented demand for housing and commercial space. The completion of the Croton Aqueduct in 1845 solved Manhattan's freshwater crisis, enabling the dense urban development that would make the Wendels' strategic landholdings multiply in value exponentially each decade. In 1856, the family established their iconic mansion at 442 Fifth Avenue, constructed for $150,000, equivalent to $5.3 million today. This imposing red brick brownstone occupied a 100 by 100-foot plot at the corner of 39th Street, serving as both family residence and the symbolic command center of their expanding real estate empire. The 40-room structure would remain largely unchanged for 75 years, becoming increasingly incongruous as Manhattan's architectural landscape transformed around it. While the Vanderbilts erected palatial mansions and corporate interests built ever taller skyscrapers, the Wendels maintained their fortress with stubborn resistance to modernization. By 1910, it would be the last private residence in Midtown, surrounded by hotels and commercial buildings whose owners repeatedly offered millions for the prime location. When John G. Wendel I died in 1859, the family fortune stood at approximately $3 million, equivalent to $110 million today, primarily invested in 92% unimproved land and aging residential buildings. His passing triggered a succession crisis that would unleash his son's pathological need for control and transform 6 women into prisoners of their own inheritance. John G. Wendel II's appointment as executor in 1871 marked the beginning of a domestic regime that would subjugate his 6 sisters: Rebecca, Georgiana, Ella, Augusta, Josephine, and Mary, for decades to come. Unlike many Gilded Age patriarchs who wielded financial power through corporate boardrooms, Wendel engineered his control through an intimate architecture of familial imprisonment. His first maneuver exploited 19th-century coverture laws that treated married women's assets as their husband's property, forcing his sisters to sign legally dubious spinster agreements that would forfeit their inheritance rights upon marriage. The mansion at 442 Fifth Avenue became the physical manifestation of this control, with the sisters housed in shared bedrooms on upper floors while Wendel occupied the ground floor with direct street access, a spatial hierarchy that reinforced his dominance. To prevent external influences, he hired tutors to educate his sisters with curricula focused on property law and ledger keeping rather than liberal arts, creating a captive managerial class dependent on his approval. The psychological impact of this domestic tyranny manifested in the sisters' maladaptive behaviors, including Georgiana's documented hoarding of 412 moth-eaten dresses, none newer than 1870s fashions. Following their mother's death in 1872, the sisters wore only black bombazine, yet paradoxically spent $12,000 annually, equivalent to $360,000 today, on Brussels lace trim. Wendel enforced a financial lockdown that sequestered all tenant payments into trust accounts, requiring unanimous sibling consent for withdrawals, a structure later ruled illegal in the 1915 court case in re Wendel. His architectural containment strategy intensified after 1892 anarchist bombings near neighboring Astor properties, when he installed wrought iron window bars and constructed a 12-foot perimeter wall studded with iron spikes. The mansion stood defiantly against modernization, rejecting Edison's 1882 electrical grid connection purportedly to prevent sisters' exposure to degenerate media, like telephones. Despite receiving $2.3 million in annual rental income, household budgets capped food at $18 weekly, less than their doorman's salary. Wendel himself exhibited peculiar behaviors, wearing platform shoes with inch-thick soles to protect against disease entering through his feet, a detail that highlighted his paranoia. Rebecca Wendel, the eldest sister, staged the family's only successful rebellion at age 60, marrying Lutheran minister Luther Swope in 1903. Their correspondence reveals a startling duality. Rebecca publicly decried marriage as a bourgeois trap, while secretly amassing a trousseau over 3 decades. Swope's 1912 letter to Ella exposed the marriage's transactional nature. "Your sister required proof I'd renounce any claim to Wendel assets. I signed gladly, for love needs no ledger." Georgiana Wendel's psychological deterioration resulted in institutionalization at Bellevue Asylum in 1899 after she sued Wendel for $50,000 in withheld inheritance. Her case files diagnose hysterical neurosis stemming from prolonged emotional malnutrition, with treatment including forced embroidery sessions producing tapestries of Fifth Avenue properties. By the time John G. Wendel II died in 1914, his sisters had so thoroughly internalized their captivity that they continued the same lifestyle without rebellion. The 6 Wendel sisters, now aging spinsters in their 60s and 70s, maintained their Victorian dress and gaslit lifestyle, while the city around them embraced automobiles, electric appliances, and the dawning jazz age. Their collective decision to perpetuate their brothers' eccentric practices, rather than embrace freedom, revealed the profound psychological damage wrought by decades of control, a Stockholm syndrome that would manifest in their obsessive attachment to a succession of pedigreed poodles who received more care than their human tenants. As Manhattan entered the Roaring Twenties, the Wendel sisters' peculiar attachment to their poodles transcended ordinary pet ownership and became a displacement mechanism for their thwarted maternal instincts. Ella Wendel, who would become the last surviving sibling, lavished extraordinary attention on a succession of French poodles all named Toby, creating a canine dynasty that stood in stark contrast to the human lineage her brother had deliberately terminated. Each poodle received a jeweled collar worth $15,000, equivalent to $360,000 in today's currency, while the sisters themselves wore patched undergarments and refused modern conveniences. When a Toby died, the ritual mourning included a velvet-lined casket and formal burial in the Irvington Pet Cemetery, with meticulous succession planning that ensured the next Toby inherited the previous dog's royal accoutrements. The backyard of their Fifth Avenue mansion became known as the $1 Million Dog Run, a 2,500-square-foot urban oasis featuring a heated kennel with stained glass windows depicting ancestral Wendel estates. Developers repeatedly offered $1.5 million for this prime Manhattan real estate in 1927, but Ella refused, citing Toby XIV's constitutional needs as taking precedence over commercial opportunities. The sisters' summer residence in Irvington, New York, offered a parallel universe of eccentric behaviors, where they maintained Ayrshire cows despite documented lactose intolerance. Georgiana's diary notes, "Milk pours to troughs while we take tea." Their 50-room cottage contained its own contradictions. No telephone service until 1928, when fire marshals mandated emergency lines. Yet walls that, when X-rayed in 2001, revealed gold leaf beneath peeling wallpaper. For 7 decades, the Wendels locked their Fifth Avenue mansion each summer to live in Irvington, where they kept livestock and maintained a kitchen garden, manual labor that seemed incongruous with their wealth and urban reclusiveness. The family's 200 apple trees produced cider vinegar for cleaning, not consumption, with harvests reportedly left to rot ceremonially each autumn to feed the soil's humours. Irish immigrant labourers employed from 1870 through 1931 described the sisters hand-washing linens in the Hudson River for character building, despite their immense wealth. While the Wendels treated their poodles like royalty, the human residents of their approximately 150 Manhattan properties endured deplorable conditions that eventually attracted the attention of health authorities and housing reformers. The 1901 Tenement House Act inspections exposed the consequences of the family's no repairs policy, when investigators found 72% of Wendel rental units lacking ventilation or running water compared to 53% citywide. By 1910, tuberculosis rates in Wendel properties had reached 300% above Manhattan's average, creating a public health crisis directly attributable to their neglect. Buildings like 87 Orchard Street exemplified the decline. 1/3 of children born in Wendel tenements between 1905 and 1910 did not survive to age 5. The family's reputation transformed from merely eccentric to actively predatory through exposés like Upton Sinclair's 1927 piece, The House of Closed Shutters, which galvanized tenant unions against what he termed Wendel slumlords. When the last Toby died in 1933, his taxidermied remains sparked a legal battle between Drew University, a beneficiary of the Wendel estate, and the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, resolved by displaying him under glass in Mead Hall until a 1944 fire. The jarring contrast between the jewel-collared, pampered poodles and the suffering tenants became symbolic of the Wendels' twisted relationship with wealth, the capacity to provide comfort and security deployed selectively for canines while humans suffered. Ella Wendel's 1921 diary encapsulated this dissonance. Mr. Rockefeller's razing of the old Baptist tabernacle proves the transience of worldly things. This cognitive disconnect between accumulating vast wealth while living in calculated squalor would establish the groundwork for the family's ultimate economic downfall. An empire built on strategic neglect cannot indefinitely defy the forces of urban progress and regulatory reform. The Wendel family's investment philosophy crystallized under John G. Wendel II into what real estate historians would later term the Wendel Doctrine, a counterintuitive approach to wealth management that defied conventional capitalism. At its core lay 4 ironclad principles that transformed neglect into a perversely effective business model. No mortgages, no sales, no repairs, and strategic uptown migration. The first commandment, purchasing all properties outright with cash reserves and avoiding interest payments, insulated the family from financial upheavals that devastated leveraged investors during the panics of 1873 and 1893. Their absolute prohibition on divestment created a compounding effect, as Manhattan land values appreciated at 7% annually from 1850 to 1900, allowing their portfolio to grow from 112 properties in 1900 to 150 by 1910. The most controversial aspect, minimal maintenance of buildings, reduced operating costs while exploiting New York's chronic housing shortage, which ensured tenant demand despite deteriorating conditions. This calculated neglect reached its nadir when buildings like the infamous tenement at 87 Orchard Street received only emergency repairs, creating what housing reformers dubbed vertical cholera farms in the immigrant-dense Lower East Side. Their uptown migration strategy, acquiring properties 10 blocks north of current premium zones every decade, positioned them to profit from Midtown's emergence as a business district in the 1910s. The family's crown jewel remained their Fifth Avenue mansion, occupying a 100 by 100-foot plot valued at $1.5 million in 1931, $30 million today. The property exemplified their philosophy of holding prime land while forgoing income maximization, a stance that became increasingly irrational as skyscrapers rose around them, including the Empire State Building completed in 1931. Their eccentric lifestyle choices functioned as visible manifestations of their business philosophy. The sisters, hanging patched undergarments on a rooftop clothesline, visible to the Waldorf Astoria's penthouse guests, served as performance art, declaring their rejection of consumer culture. Rebecca Wendel's Friday ritual of riding the 6th Avenue L to Washington Market to bargain for day-old bread while wearing a moth-eaten 1870s crinoline dramatized their contempt for the nouveau riche who flaunted consumption. Despite receiving $2.3 million yearly in rental income, the mansion's thermometers rarely rose above 55 degrees Fahrenheit in winter. Chill preserves virtue, John II had declared in 1895 correspondence. Ironically, this self-imposed austerity masked immense hidden wealth. Ella's 1907 ledger shows 12 cents spent on codfish versus $18,000 annually for poodle grooming. The Wendel approach created a self-reinforcing cycle. Rental income from downtown properties funded uptown acquisitions, while tax benefits from depreciating buildings offset rental revenues. Their 1905 battle against eminent domain for the Hudson Terminal project revealed the strategy's legal dimensions, spending $20,000, equivalent to $650,000 today, to retain a $75,000 property established precedents in land use law. However, this model contained inherent contradictions that became increasingly untenable as Manhattan modernized. Their resistance to transit development, evidenced by blocking interborough rapid transit subway access to 28th Street in 1904, reduced foot traffic to their garment district holdings and sacrificed $12 million in potential retail income in today's value. The 1916 setback laws rendered their full-block buildings functionally obsolete, yet no retrofits occurred despite changing market demands. Their maintenance of 1850s-era fire policies without inflation riders led to $1.8 million in unrecovered losses in the aftermath of the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. By the 1920s, while competitors like the Astors embraced steel frame construction and electric elevators, the Wendels clung to outmoded building designs and amenities, with their unimproved lots becoming liabilities under new zoning regulations. The approach that had protected them from earlier financial panics left them vulnerable to a perfect storm of regulatory changes, market evolution, and taxation reforms that would threaten the very foundations of their peculiar empire. When Ella Wendel died on March 15, 1931, the last guardian of Manhattan's strangest dynasty left behind a vacuum that nature and the legal system rushed to fill with unprecedented ferocity. As the sole surviving sibling, Ella had reluctantly managed the family's 150 properties through the onset of the Great Depression, watching vacancy rates in their financial district buildings reach 45% by 1932. Her death unleashed what the New York Times called the most extraordinary inheritance battle in the city's history, a legal feeding frenzy involving 2,303 claimants to an estate valued at $100 million, equivalent to $2.1 billion today. The claimants ranged from alleged secret love children to distant cousins, each armed with elaborate genealogies, forged diaries, ancestral daguerreotypes, and dramatic testimonials about their connection to the Wendel bloodline. Among the more colorful pretenders was Martha Schroeder, who claimed to be the daughter of Wendel II's secret 1880s affair with a family maid, complete with documentation of an exile to Santa Monica under the alias Mrs. Holwedel, with a $5,000 annual stipend. The court proceedings revealed the existence of John Jr., purportedly hidden through elaborate protocols, including a craftsman bungalow with a secret basement apartment for Wendel II's visits. Claims later supported by genetic testing showing a 99.98% paternity match. The legal battle culminated in 1933 when surrogate James A. Foley approved a settlement granting over $2 million to 9 distant relatives, effectively acknowledging the legitimate branches of the family tree while dismissing thousands of spurious claims. Beyond the human drama, the estate faced an existential threat from tax authorities. The 1922 reforms had imposed 25% levies on undistributed trust income, forcing the first breach of the never sell dogma. The estate's tax bill necessitated the unthinkable, liquidating significant portions of the portfolio that had been accumulated over a century and preserved through the family's pathological resistance to divestment. This forced sale transformed Manhattan's physical landscape as Wendel properties became available for development after decades of artificial constraint, with parcels eventually incorporated into landmarks like Rockefeller Center and sites that would later host modern skyscrapers. The mansion at 442 Fifth Avenue, once valued at $1.5 million in 1931, was ultimately raised for a $4.2 million office tower developed by Drew University, one of the charitable beneficiaries of the estate. This redevelopment yielded a 58% annualized return by 1941, compared to the Wendel's historical 2.3% yield, a posthumous rebuke to their antiquated business model. The remaining estate was split among 5 charitable organizations, marking the final dissolution of a dynasty that had once controlled vast swaths of prime Manhattan real estate through a philosophy of deliberate inaction. The taxidermied remains of Toby XIV, the last in the line of pampered poodles, found their way to the Museum of the City of New York, a macabre memento of a family whose priorities had placed canine comfort above human welfare. The legal precedent established in the 1933 Matter of Wendel case continues to influence inheritance law, reportedly blocking 43% of contested claims in New York courts to this day. Architectural traces of the Wendel legacy have been almost completely erased from Manhattan's physical landscape. No plaques commemorate their holdings, no buildings bear their name, and few New Yorkers recognize the dynasty that once controlled their city block by block. What remains instead is a cautionary tale of wealth preservation taken to pathological extremes. The family that refused to build, improve, or adapt ultimately lost everything to the very forces of progress they had resisted. Their once imposing Fifth Avenue mansion, which famously lacked electricity while skyscrapers rose around it, became, ironically, a parking garage before its demolition, the ultimate symbol of a dynasty that refused to evolve and was subsequently paved over by modernity. The Wendels' resistance to change, embodied in gaslighting, Victorian dress, and primitive plumbing, proved no match for the inexorable forces of urban development, tax reform, and generational transition. In the final accounting, the empire that John G. Wendel II had preserved through psychological manipulation, architectural containment, and financial lockdown strategies disintegrated within 2 years of Ella's death, proving that fortunes built on stasis cannot withstand the hurricane forces of change in America's most dynamic city. And now, we'd like to see you in the comments. Had you heard of the Wendel family before this video, and what is your opinion on their wild story? We look forward to your personal opinions, and thanks again for joining us for another episode. Cheers, until the next one.